Ms. Nye, on the dispatch are two voices which should be familiar to you. Aside, there's your voice, and then there's another voice of a man who appears to be someone in the room with you. Could you tell me who that was, please?
Yes, it was Nick Tatone.
Could you spell his last name for the court reporter?
Last name is Tatone. He was my partner that night.
Your Honor, I have here two tapes, one for either jury. I'd like to mark them as people's 1 and 2, or 1A and 1B, or how does it?
Any exhibits will be marked just
1, 2, 3.
just one, and the duplicates will be handled by the clerks.
All right.
If you have an exhibit, you can mark the exhibit 1, and the clerk will take care of the duplicates.
All right, so Your Honor, I have two exhibits, each of which I'm now marking as 1. Is that correct?
Yes.
May I approach, please, Your Honor?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, may I have the first permission to play that tape?
Is it in the
Yes.
player?
Yes, it is.
All right. All right, go ahead. Is there a transcript of that tape?
Yes, Your Honor. May we approach, please, on that?
Yes.
Okay.
Let's proceed then. You may approach the witness.
Thank you.
And if you intend to play the tape, let me ask counsel, do you stipulate that the court reporter need not take down the proceedings as the tape is being played?
Yes.
Yes.
All right.
Emergency?
Yes, please.
What's the problem? What's the problem? What's the problem?
Somebody killed my parents.
Pardon me?
Somebody killed my parents.
What? Who? Are they still there?
Yes.
The people...
No.
Were they shot?
Hey, man, Bill.
Were they shot?
Yes.
They were shot?
Yes.
I'm going to see what I was still shot. I'm going to go and tell our father.
What happened? Hey, get out, hey.
I had to stare at the person when I was trying to get to them further. I don't even know if it's funny. Is the person still there?
What happened? We have you to zero. What happened? Who shot who? I don't do anything. You came home and found who shot? Mom and Dad. You're in bed?
You know, they're still in the house, the people that did the shooting.
Okay. Let me talk to Eric. Who is the person that was shot? My mom and my dad. Your mom and dad? My mom and dad. Okay, hold on a second. Okay, we're on our way over there with the ambulance. Okay, I gotta go. Hello, this is the police department. Yes. Okay, I want you to come outside. Okay, just come out the front door and Look at my brother. you tell your brother, everybody that's come outside.
Ms. Nye, was that an accurate recordation of the events of that evening? Oh, sorry.
Yes, it was.
Now, in the tape, it appears that a phone call was made near the very end of the tape, because you can hear the tones of a touch-tone phone. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, was the house involved actually called back by the police department?
Yes, it was.
And how was it that the police department knew the phone number so that they could call back?
It comes in on our 911 screen. We get a 911 call. It gives us the phone number and the address.
So during the first phone call, was that information then flashed onto your screen?
Yes.
Okay. May I have a moment, please, Your Honor?
Yes.
Ms. Knight, were you on duty the entire evening that night?
You know, I honestly don't remember what time I started, but I believe I started mid-evening. I'm not sure.
What is mid-evening?
About 10 o'clock.
Did you receive any phone calls prior to the 911 call reporting shots fired?
No.
Let me just finish.
I'm sorry.
Shots fired in the neighborhood or vicinity of the North Elm location.
No, we didn't.
So the first notice you had was this phone call that's
Mhm.
in People's One? Is that
Yes.
correct? Thank you. I have nothing further.
Cross-examination?
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Nye, you had been with the Beverly Hills Police Department how long back in 1989?
But then I was a little over 2 years.
All right. And during the 2 years, were you working as a dispatcher?
Yes.
And as a dispatcher, you would take calls about crimes, is that correct?
Yes.
And would it be fair to characterize this particular call as a highly emotional one?
Yes.
That is, based on your experience during the time that you worked as a dispatcher for Beverly Hills.
Yes.
Was there any other contact with this residence on Beverly, with the people inside 722 North Elm Drive, other than what we heard on the tape recorder?
From my standpoint?
Yes,
No.
that you had.
No.
And did you yourself dial back the second call?
No, that was my partner.
Do you have any recollection as to when units were dispatched to 722 North Elm Drive?
Immediately.
And do you have any recollection, based on what you were able to monitor, as to when those units actually arrived at the home?
They probably arrived within 1 to 2 minutes.
And do you think that, based on their arrival time at the home, you could be wrong about the time that might be passing?
Yes, I could be wrong. Now I'm thinking in my mind they set up a perimeter before, but I'm not sure whether that's before they went in the house or before they asked us to call and have them come out. I mean, I'm really not certain.
All right, thank you very much.
Your Honor, may I approach, please?
Is any cross-examination by the defendant Lyle Menendez?
Yes, just. You said you didn't receive any other calls that night relating to this matter, correct?
Correct.
Were there other dispatchers who would have been receiving calls relating to this matter?
Well, there were only 2 of us there. That was myself and Nick Tatone, up until about 10 o'clock that night.
And so he could have been receiving calls from other people while you were handling this?
Oh, yes, he could have been, yes.
So you're speaking for yourself?
Well, can I just say one thing? We did mention the fact, why didn't anyone ever call us on that? That we got no shooting calls at all. We talked about that night, because
And-
that's unusual.
And do you know whether any other calls were, any documentation was made as to whether any calls were received that night?
No, I don't know for a fact.
Okay. Have a group of documents on that be marked as
Exhibit 2.
Exhibit 2? Exhibit 2, do you know what that is?
That's, yeah, I saw this prior to coming in here. Just times of when people were dispatched.
And that's a document that relates to this case, correct?
Correct.
And that shows that the first call was received on what time?
2347.
And the next activity that's indicated in your records is what?
Well, the paramedics were dispatched
What time were they dispatched?
at 2348,
And what time was the callback made?
at 2351.
So it wasn't 20 to 30 minutes, was it?
No, it wasn't.
How long was it before the callback was made?
Within 2 minutes, 3 minutes.
Could I see that, please? Thank you. And on the second page, does it also indicate that some neighbors called in?
Yes, this was after the fact.
Okay, what time did neighbors first call in?
00:43, must be 1:45
Quarter to 1 on which date?
on, that would be August 21st.
And you received your call shortly before midnight?
Mm-hmm,
And this call from a neighbor came in shortly after midnight, correct?
yes,
There were other calls there from neighbors later on?
yes.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Any redirect?
Just briefly, the document Peoples 2, which,
Exhibit 2.
excuse me, Exhibit 2, which, Defense Attorney District, could you explain to me how this document is prepared, if you know?
I don't,
All right.
no.
And is the entry here about the callback being at 21:51, does that refresh your memory as to when, in fact, the callback was made to 722 North Elm?
Well, yeah, now that I see it, it was almost 4 years ago, but yes.
Okay, thank you, I have nothing further.
Anything else from either counsel?
No, Your Honor.
No, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. You may step down. Your next witness.
Yes, Your Honor, people call Mrs. Avrille Krom to the stand.
Sit down, relax, and tell us your name.
I'm Avrille Krom,
Spell those names, please.
Avrillekrom.
Okay, Mrs. Krom, would you just sit back, please, and take a deep breath? Okay. Do you remember the night of August the 20th of 1989?
Yes,
And sometime that evening, did you hear some noises that caught your attention?
yes.
Could you tell us what you heard, please?
I had heard some sounds going off, and I thought that they were Chinese firecrackers.
Okay. Mrs. Krom, where were you physically located when you heard these noises?
I was in my bedroom.
Okay. Now, where do you live in relationship to the Menendez home?
I'm 2 houses down. There's one house in between the 2 houses,
Would you be 2 houses closer to Wilshire or closer to Sunset?
to Wilshire.
And you were in your bedroom, is that correct?
Yes,
Did you have any windows open in your bedroom that night?
yes. It was a hot night, and all the windows were open.
Do you remember about what time it was that you heard the noises?
It was between 10 and 10:15.
Is there a way that you can remember what time it was?
Yes, because my daughter was going out, and I didn't really want her to go because I felt it was getting late in the evening. And I told her she had to be back by 10:30. So it meant she had 10 minutes or 15 minutes to run up to see her friend who was living a little bit up the road.
Now, can you describe the noises that you heard more particularly? In other words, how many noises did you hear and for how long a period of time?
It was a series of like popping. There were, I would say, about a half a dozen of these pops, and then there was a little lag.
A little what?
A lag in the time, and then they started popping again.
Okay, by a lag in time, you mean there was a period of time where there was no popping noises?
Just a short period of time, and that's why I had thought that they were Chinese firecrackers.
Okay.
Because
What do you know about Chinese firecrackers?
I only remember from when I was a child, they had there was a series of little wicks, and as they popped along on the one side, and then it flipped to the other side, and then they started again. But there was a time lag in between from the time, I don't know if it's the same in this country, but from the time that they popped on the one side till they ignited on the other, there was a time lag. And that's why I had thought that these were Chinese firecrackers.
Was anyone else present in the room with you when you heard the noise?
Yes, my son.
Okay. Did your son want to call the police?
Yes.
Can I stop for a minute and ask that you sit down?
Oh, Your Honor, I'm sorry.
Just sit down.
Okay,
Go ahead.
all right. Mrs. Krom, did your son want to call the police?
Yes.
And did you dissuade him from doing that?
Yes, I wouldn't let him.
Okay, thank you. I have nothing further.
Cross-examination.
Good afternoon.
Hi.
Is it okay if I move this forward? Ms. Krom, you lived south of where the Menendez home was at that time, is that correct?
Yes.
And these homes along Elm Drive are rather close together, isn't that true?
Yes.
The amount of space that separates you from the next house to the north is very narrow, isn't that true?
I don't know what you mean by very narrow, but it's not a huge amount of space, no.
Well, for instance, is it about the space where you were sitting to the wall to your right there?
To the next house?
Right.
From my house? No,
Yes.
it's more than that.
From the side that's nearest your house to your next door neighbor's side wall, how far would you say it is?
At least double that size, that amount of size.
And you say
What are you
that
talking about from where you are to that wall?
Yeah,
Okay.
double that space,
yeah,
correct?
That's 15 feet from where the witness is to the
Right.
wall.
And you say the windows in your house were open that night?
yes,
Where were you in the house?
in my bedroom, which is wait a minute, let me get this right. The northeast side of the house.
There's an alley that runs in back of your house, is that
Yes,
correct?
yes,
And that is an alley that's toward Maple Street?
right,
And is that, were you nearest the back of the house toward the alley?
correct,
And the Menendez home also faces back on that same alley, is that right?
correct.
What were you doing when you heard these noises? Do you recall?
I was talking, I was talking to my son. I know I was talking to my son because he said, I'm going to call the police. And I said, you're not going to call, don't be ridiculous.
And in terms of what you heard, these popping sounds, is it correct to say that these popping sounds were in very quick succession?
Yes,
As in pop, 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 pop?
yes,
And I think you also indicated that there was somewhat of a lag, correct?
yes,
But that was a very short period of time, correct?
correct.
Almost instantaneously before you started hearing it popping again, correct?
Yeah, not instant. There was a time lag. You know, it's been 4 years, but
Sure.
I remember thinking that it was definitely the Chinese firecrackers. So definite was I. But because I imagined that it was igniting on the other side.
All right, let me ask you this. Do you recall the next day after you heard these sounds that a police officer came to your door and knocked on the door?
Yes,
And you recall that at some point after the police officer knocked on your door that he had you come down to the police station and actually interviewed you about what you had heard that night. Do you remember that?
I never went down to the police station. My daughter did. I didn't.
Were you interviewed at some point on a
Yes.
tape recorder?
Yes.
Where did that interview take place?
At my house.
And that was the very next morning after you heard these sounds, correct?
Correct.
Would it be fair to say that your recollection of what you heard that night would have been best that next morning?
Yes.
And would it be fair to say that your recollection was probably much better than it is today 4 years ago?
Oh, sure.
All right. I want to play you a little portion of your interview with a police officer so we can see if it helps you remember
Okay.
how the sequence of the shots went, okay?
Okay.
And next in order would be Exhibit 3, Your Honor. Yes, would be a tape recording. By the way, this was an interview where your daughter was present and also your son, correct?
I don't have any recollection of.
Well, listen to this. This picks up right in the middle of
Okay.
a conversation, and you tell me if this is your voice on here.
Josh, you heard some sounds that you thought might be gunshots?
Yeah, I was in the middle of watching a movie and tribute for the Korean Air plane that got shot down. And it was about halfway through the plane, and it was around about 10. And I started hearing shots about 6 in a row.
And Mrs. Krom, you also heard them?
I heard them too. And I thought they were trying to firecrackers because they were like,
And Josh, you looked out the back window and saw nothing, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Just that portion, was that your voice on there?
Yeah.
And at least at that time, that is the very next morning afterwards, you characterized it as pop, 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 correct?
Yeah.
And is that, at that time, you were trying to be as accurate as to what you heard as possible?
Well, I wasn't asked about any time lag, so I mean, I know that they didn't. Was at the best of my ability at that point. I mean, I didn't know I was supposed to elaborate on all of that, but
Right.
it was a series of popping. But they came directly, and then there were some that lagged afterwards. But I was never asked about that.
All right, and does listening to that help you refresh your memory that the second sound of pops that you heard was very shortly after the first
Yes,
group?
yes,
So they were all bunched in right close in time?
yeah, yeah,
There's one house between your residence and the Menendez residence, correct?
yes.
And Dan, could I approach a witness room?
Yes.
Thank you. Showing you Exhibit 4A, does that photograph depict your driveway where a blue truck
Yes,
is parked?
yes.
And in the upper right-hand corner of that photograph is a white house. Is that the Menendez home?
Yes,
So that's how far your house is from the Menendez house,
Right.
correct? So it's fairly easy for you to hear those shots at night, is that correct?
yes,
And is that another shot showing the distance between your house and the Menendez home?
yes.
What was that?
That is 4B. And does 4C accurately show the distance between the Menendez home and the home right to the north of it?
Correct.
And is 4D a close-up of that same
Yes,
photograph showing the distance
Yes.
between the two homes?
yes,
Is 4E a photograph showing the back alleyway behind your house?
yes,
And you'll see there's, looks like a blue Volvo parked there?
yes.
Is that blue Volvo parked right in front of your home? Sure.
It looks like it, yes.
Okay. And the Menendez home is in front of the blue Volvo where the first set of garbage cans are?
Right, next to the white guest house there. Sorry, next to the white guest house. There's a white guest house.
Is that another photograph 4F showing the same distance between the back of the Menendez home and your home, which is depicted
Yes,
in the lower left-hand corner where there's appears to be a white
right,
fence?
fence, yeah.
And 4G, does that show the distance between the back of the Menendez home and the house
Yes,
directly adjoining it, which would be 720
right,
Elm Drive?
right.
Thank you very much. You sell real estate?
Yes.
Do you know what your lot size is?
Do you know, I don't. I think it's 225, 90 by 225.
And is that about the same size as the lots on the street?
It gets a little bit bigger as the block goes higher.
As you go north,
Yeah,
they get larger?
it gets a little bit larger.
But in your block, that's about the block size?
Yes.
Thank you. That's all I have.
All right, any cross-examination on behalf of the defendant, Eric Menendez?
Yes, Your Honor, thank you. Mrs. Krom, did you speak with any police officers on the evening of August 20th?
Yes. That was the next day you're talking about?
No, this is the same evening that you heard the noise.
No.
And did you first speak with the police the next morning?
Yes.
And when did they come to your house?
6:30 in the morning, somewhere around there.
Did you speak with them at that time?
No.
Did you speak with them later?
Yes.
Approximately when was it that you spoke with him, with the police?
About 8:30.
Okay, and that was at your home?
Yes.
Did you become aware that either your daughter or your son had spoken to the police when they came to the house at about 6:30 in the morning?
So you asked,
Did you-
was I aware of
Yeah.
that?
Did you hear anybody speaking to them when they first came? at
No,
6:30?
there was somebody knocking on the door at 6:30, and I figured I'm not going to bother with it, so I didn't answer.
And was the person that you spoke to later on that morning a person by the name of Edmonds, a Sergeant Edmonds?
Forgive me, I'm terrible with names. I don't know, it may have been.
Did the person that spoke to you take notes?
Yes.
And these were notes that were taken down as you were being interviewed?
You know, I don't remember, but I think so. I mean, I remember when they interviewed my daughter that they were taking a lot of notes, and I think that must have fallen off with the...
Now, were these notes being taken that you saw while they interviewed your daughter, was that at the same time as the tape recording was going on, or was that at a different time?
I'm not sure at which interview this recording was done because I got interviewed quite a few times. And I really don't remember which interview I said what, except that I said more or less the same thing at every time.
In the first interview that you had that was at your house,
Yeah.
did the police ask you about hearing any noises?
Yes.
Okay, and was it then that you remembered the firecrackers that you heard the night before?
It was actually when my son said to me, because I never connected a murder with the sounds that I was hearing. And when I'd heard that there was a murder on the street, it was only when my son said, "Oh, Mom, that's what I was telling you. Those were shotguns." So only then did I click what I was hearing as to what was going on.
Did you tell the police when you talked to them the next morning that you believe you had heard 6 shots? 6 sounds, 6 separate
Yeah,
sounds?
I know it was in excess of 6. I mean, it was.
So you gave them a number that you recall, correct?
I believe it was in excess of 6. And I don't remember then. I mean, what I said.
And nobody showed you your notes or anything, right?
He gave me the notes. I don't know where they are.
Okay. In any event, you told them that you heard firecrackers because that was the best way you had of describing the sound.
Yes.
Now, let's focus on the time. You said that you were in your bedroom when you heard the firecrackers,
Yes.
and you were with your son Josh.
Yes.
And was there something on television?
Yeah, there was something about an aeroplane crash that he was watching intermittently while talking to me.
Now, when you heard the sound, did you look at the clock?
Not specifically at that time, but I had been watching the clock all the time because I wanted my daughter back in the house, and her friend was late to pick her up.
So at the time you heard the sounds, had your daughter left yet?
No, not yet.
And do you recall looking at the clock when your daughter left?
Yes.
And what was it when your daughter left?
I think it was around 10:20, 10:15, 10:20, somewhere
so
in there.
it would be correct then to say that you heard these sounds before your daughter left
Yes.
at 10:20.
Yes.
And can you tell us about how long before your daughter left that you heard the sounds?
A maximum of 20 minutes, probably 10. I would, if you asked me to get more specific, I would say 10 minutes, somewhere around. I think it was around 10:10, somewhere around there.
And your bedroom, I believe you told us, is at the back part of the house?
Yes.
Your daughter Jennifer's bedroom is at the front of the house,
Yes.
correct? Was it normal at that time of year for all the windows in the house to be open at night?
Yeah.
Okay, so that, do you know where your daughter Jennifer was when you heard these sounds?
She was in her front room, in her bedroom in the front, waiting for her friend to come for her. So she was watching out the window.
And she was watching directly on the street.
Yes.
Do you know whether or not she reported hearing anything?
She didn't hear anything, no.
When did you become aware that the Menendez family was living at 722 North Elm Drive?
Oh, a few months prior to that, they had sent around a flyer for tennis lessons, and I had suggested to my kids to go and take tennis lessons there.
Okay, so that was the first contact or the first knowledge that you had that somebody had moved into that particular house?
Oh, I knew the previous owner, so
But you had never met the Menendezes, correct?
no,
Had you ever seen any of the family
no,
during the time they lived there?
no.
And the flyer that was passed around, was that offering tennis lessons at the house?
Yes.
And that was something that you believe the boys had passed around? Or
I'm
someone
not
else?
sure. I'm not sure who was offering the tennis lessons, but I had, I just presumed it was the kids because I'd heard they were good tennis players. And I used to hear them on the court from my bedroom.
Thank you very much.
Okay,
I have nothing further.
thank
Any
you.
redirect?
No, thank you.
All right, thank you. You may step down.
Thank
You're
you,
excused.
thank you.
Michael Butkus, Michael Butkus.
What do you do for a living, please?
Police officer for the city of Beverly Hills.
On August the 20th of 1989, were you also employed as a police officer for the city of Beverly Hills?
Yes, I was working patrol.
How long had you been a police officer at that time, sir?
Approximately 7 years.
And so, as of now, you've been a police officer approximately 11 years?
At that time, correction, I've been a police officer now for 8 years. 4 years ago, I would have been a police officer at that time for 4 years.
All right. On August the 20th of 1989, at approximately 11:47 p.m., were you in a radio car?
Yes, I was with a partner.
Okay, could you tell us your partner's name and please spell it for the court reporter?
His name is John Zernacki, John I believe.
Now, Officer Butkus, sometime around 11:47, did you receive a radio call which sent you to an address?
Yes, I did.
Do you recall from whom you received the radio call?
From the Beverly Hills Police dispatcher.
Was that Ms. Nye or a male?
It was Ms. Nye.
And at that time, did you then proceed to 722 North Elm Drive?
Yes, I did.
When you got to 722 North Elm Drive, were you the first police unit on the scene?
Yes, my partner and I were in the car, and we approached that address in a southbound type direction, parking approximately 2 houses away from 722.
Did you also park on the west side of the street?
I don't recall the exact side of the street.
What did you do then?
I then exited the car with my partner, and on foot, we approached the house.
What happened then?
We stopped for a moment. Approximately a minute and a half went by when I heard some screaming from the front of 722 North Elm.
Where were you physically located when you first heard the screaming?
I would be on the east curb. The house is on the east side of the street, so I was on the curb.
Okay. At that time, did you have a weapon drawn?
No, not just yet.
Did you know what to expect when you got there?
Well, receiving the call that there had possibly been a shooting, I didn't know exactly what to expect. So
Was that the total of the information that you had when you approached the location?
that was all we had.
So you heard some screaming, is that correct?
Yes.
Could you tell from where the screaming was coming?
It was coming from the front door of the house, 722.
Could you tell at that time if the door was open or closed?
I could not. The entire area was nighttime. Obviously, it was very dark. The streetlights were the only illumination, and the house was not illuminated in any way, any other light type of lighting. So it was very dark.
Was there any sort of impediment between you and the house?
Yes, there's a steel gate that surrounds the perimeter of the house.
Was any portion of the gate open when you first noticed it that night?
I believe there's a front entrance with swinging gates that one of them, I think, was open.
And what happened after you heard the screaming?
And then 2 individuals came running from the front door of that house towards the curb where I was positioned.
And at that time, did you make contact with those 2 individuals?
We made contact with 2 individuals.
And do you see them in court today?
Seated at counsel's table, defendant
What's he
one.
wearing? What color is he wearing today?
He has a pink shirt with a white sweater on.
Referring to the defendant, Lyle Menendez.
And do you see the other person?
Yes, other defendant in the blue shirt with the burgundy tie.
That's the defendant, Eric Menendez.
Thank you, Your Honor. What did you do next? In other words, did you tell them to do something? Did you do something? What happened?
Well, they were together. They came running out towards the front of the house where I was positioned, still yelling and screaming, and they made their way to the curb where I was, at which time I told them, I believe I had a weapon drawn possibly, telling them to get down on the ground, both of them, at which time they both complied.
Now, when you say they were yelling and screaming, were both of them yelling and screaming?
I couldn't tell if both of them, I don't recall.
When they came out of the house, did you know who they were, what relationship they were to why you were there?
No, I did
You
not.
told them to sit on the curb, is that correct?
I told them to just get down on the ground.
Okay, so in what manner did they, in fact, get on the ground?
They both went down onto all fours, and then later into a sitting position.
Okay, did you ever do what's known as prone them out?
I guess you could call that proning out on the curb area there, yes.
Could you tell the jury what proning out is?
Is when you ask a subject to get down on the ground, you're proning them out, meaning lay down on the ground with your belly on the ground and your hands and legs also on the ground, and hopefully with the face down.
Okay, did they in fact do that?
For a moment, yes.
Okay. After that happened, what did they do?
They got into a seated type of position where I tried to ask them questions to decipher what was going on.
Okay, and do you remember which of the two you asked, or did you ask both of them, or how did that work?
I just asked both of them simultaneously.
And where were they physically located? Were they next to each other? Was there any distance between them?
They're next to each other, maybe a foot apart.
Were they seated?
Yes, they were on the a grassy area on the curb.
Was that the grassy area between the sidewalk and the curb, or between the sidewalk and the house?
Between the street and the sidewalk, the grass median.
Okay. So you asked them questions, is that correct?
Yes, I did.
What kinds of questions did you ask?
I wanted to find out what was going on inside, if someone had been shot, if there was a suspect still inside the house.
And what did you find out?
At the time, they were very distraught, and they were uncooperative in giving any type of answers to that. They just kept saying the same old phrases over and over.
And what was the phrase?
Oh my God, oh my God. And this continued for a while, approximately 1 or 2 minutes, where I continued to ask the same questions over and over, at which point they were still moving from a seated position back to all fours on the ground position, banging their fists on the ground. And I don't recall which defendant took his hand and pointed towards the house and continually kept saying, just go inside and see, just go see. That was the only type of response I got from them.
During the period of time that you were trying to converse with the defendants, did other units arrive at the scene?
Yes, there were other units at the scene.
And about how long after you first arrived was it that you noticed the presence of other units?
Almost immediately, there were other backup units there.
Okay. After one of the two defendants said, just go see, what happened then?
Then the sergeant on the scene approached me with a number of other officers, and due to the fact that we weren't getting any workable information from the two defendants, there was a necessity to go into the house to find a suspect or possibly someone who had been shot or injured.
Were either of the two defendants crying when you saw them?
Nothing that I would say was real crying, in my opinion.
Well, did you see any tears?
It was very dark. Their faces were a reddish color, but I don't recall seeing what I would say real teardrops coming off their face or anything.
Okay. Now, after you were told go see, did someone in fact go in the house?
Yes, the sergeant set up a number of a unit to go in and check the house, which I was a part of. There was a number of officers with the sergeant.
And so you went inside the house, is that correct?
Yes, with the other members to search the house.
Was someone left behind to stay by the defendants?
Yes, another officer took them over to, I think, a patrol car to be seated in. I'm not sure.
Do you know the name of that other officer?
I recall 4 years ago it was Officer Angel, who's no longer with the department.
Okay. And then you went inside of the house, is that correct?
We developed some type of plan, and then we, yes, prepared to enter the house.
And did you in fact go inside of the house that day in order to determine what had happened inside?
Yes, I did.
Okay, thank you. May I have a moment, please? I have no further questions of this witness at this time.
Cross-examination?
Officer, when you first met the two people coming out of the house, it's true, is it not, that they were very distraught and upset?
Yes.
And that's a description that you also told the grand jury in this case,
Yes, it
correct?
is.
That they were both very distraught and upset?
Appeared to be in that, yes.
And when you told them to get on the ground, they did so immediately, isn't that true?
Yes.
You said it was very dark that night, is that correct?
Yes. Well, describing the area around the house as being dark, no real illumination other than the street lamps on that street.
You remember at the grand jury proceeding, you were asked whether you saw any blood on either one, and you said, gee, it was too dark, I really didn't notice.
I was asked that, and that was my reply.
And is it true that your main focus when you first met up with the two gentlemen coming out of the house was to get into the house to see if there was any suspects in there?
Or the nature of the call was a shooting, so I was concerned that someone might be inside that had been shot, also to find if there was a victim that needed medical assistance.
And you don't know whether they were crying or not before you arrived, correct?
I don't know whether they're crying. No, I do not.
You'd never seen them before,
I've never seen them before.
and you don't know how they act when they're distraught and upset, do you?
No, I do not.
That's all I have, thank you.
Anything on behalf of the co-defendant?
No, Your Honor, thank you.
May you redirect?
No, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. You may step down.
It's Kirk West, W-E-S-T.
All right.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. West, what is your occupation and assignment, sir?
I'm a sergeant with the Beverly Hills Police Department. I'm assigned to the Patrol Division.
And how long have you been so employed?
17 years.
Were you on duty on the night of August 20th, 1989?
Yes.
Shortly before midnight, were you dispatched to the location at 722 North Elm Street, Elm Drive in Beverly Hills?
Yes, I was.
What was the nature of that call?
I believe the call was a shooting just occurred.
And what did you observe when you arrived at that location?
I was one of the last units actually to arrive there, and my car was parked 3 or 4 doors south. So I didn't really see that much of the house at that time.
What did you see or notice about the location?
Other than the fact that there were a number of police cars in the area, they'd already set up a containment perimeter on the house.
Your approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Sergeant West, I'm going to show you a photograph. I believe it'll be Exhibit 5, Your Honor.
Yes.
Take a look at that photograph. Do you recognize what's depicted in that photograph, sir?
Yes, that is the front of the house.
Would you describe for the jurors what you did when you arrived at that location?
Well, after I arrived, I went up to the front of the house. Although it's not shown in this photograph, there are some driveway gates, which would be just off the left. That's actually where I went in and onto the property, and I met there with Lieutenant Frank Salcido.
Was he the supervising officer at the scene?
Yes, he was.
Did you have some discussion with your lieutenant?
Yes, he made a decision that we were going to take a search team into the house.
Were you assigned to perform the search?
Yes, I was.
Okay, did you actually do the search yourself?
No, I brought 2 backup officers in with me.
How many people were involved in the search team?
Initially, it was myself and 2 officers, and later it grew to myself and I believe it would have been 5 officers total.
Do you recall who those officers were?
The initial officers that went in with me were Officer Don Prenesti and Officer Michael Dillard.
And did you have backup officers as well?
Yes, I did.
Do you recall who those officers were?
Initially, my first 2 backup officers were Officer Mike Butkus and Officer John Zarnacki.
Now, what was the purpose of this search?
It was essentially to check the house for victims and possibly suspects.
The nature of the call was a shooting at that location?
Yes.
Would you describe for the jurors what it is in particular that you did in commencing this search?
To begin the search, initially I was the one that made entry into the house and went across the foyer. Prior to actually making entry into the house and going across the foyer, there was a small den that was off to my left. The doors on that den were open, and before I actually went into the house, I used my baton and I reached in through the open door and closed the doors on this den. Then I made entry into the house.
Were the lights on to the residence?
Some of the lights were. There was a light on in the foyer area. I believe the small den area that I closed the doors on had a very dim light on inside of it. And directly at the back of the hallway or the foyer, there was a family room of some type that the lights were on in there.
As you approached the front door, is that door depicted on Exhibit 5?
Yes, it is.
And you entered into that door
Yes.
along with your search team?
I initially entered first, and they waited by the doors till I gave them a sign to come in.
After you entered the door, you indicated that you did something with your, what was it, flashlight?
Initially?
Yes.
Initially, before I even made my entry, I took my flashlight and actually skipped it across the foyer floor towards the back of it, feeling that if there was a suspect in there, it would act as a distraction.
And then what did you do?
I took up a position at the east end of the foyer against the wall.
What did your fellow officers do at that point?
They made their entry at that point, and I directed them to search what appeared to be a living room area.
Do you recognize what's depicted in that diagram, sir?
Yes, that's the first floor of the residence.
Okay, and as you indicated, you entered the front doors, correct?
Yes.
Would you step down here and show the jurors where you entered?
I actually made the entry through here and came all the way across the east end of that wall.
Excuse me.
You'd be probably better off if you stood in the witness area there, and so everyone can see.
In through here and all the way across to that wall there.
Why don't you get a pointer and stand up over here where the witness stand is, right? Get back where the seat is and get inside there and use a pointer.
Okay.
I made my entry through here, all the way across, and took up a position here.
And perhaps you can describe that for the record.
It's referring to the left side of the diagram where it indicates two doors and an entry area, across to the right to where it is indicated stairs, next to the bathroom. What did you do at that point?
At that point, I directed my two officers, excuse me, to enter and do a quick search of this living room area.
Was anything of note seen there?
No.
What did you do then?
At that point, I indicated to the officers to go ahead and just hold their positions at the living room, and I told them that I was going to take a quick look in this room behind me here, which is the family room.
And did you do so?
Yes, I did.
And did you notice anything unusual inside of that room?
Yes. When I took my first look in on the sofa, there was a male seated on the sofa, and there was a female lying on the floor just in front of the sofa.
Your Honor, I have another photograph. I have that marked as Exhibit 7. When you looked into the family room, what is it that you saw?
Pretty much as that photograph depicts it.
That's Exhibit?
The male and the female there.
Exhibit 7. Now, what is it that you noticed in particular about persons, well, there's one person seated on a couch and another, a female, lying on the ground in front of them, is that correct?
That's correct.
Did you actually go into the family room and examine the persons depicted in the photograph?
Yes, I did.
What did you do?
I initially, I initially checked the room to make sure there weren't additional victims or suspects in the room. And without touching the victims, I used my flashlight and made a very cursory examination of them.
What? Speak up. Could you repeat that, Sergeant West?
Yes, after I went in, I made a search of the room for victims or additional suspects, and then I made a cursory examination of the two people there.
Okay, we have two juries here, one in jury box, one in the audience. They all have to be able to hear you.
Yes, sir.
What is it that you did in examining these two persons?
On the male, I looked for any signs of respiration, which I did not see. He had a very large wound on his leg, which I noticed was not bleeding. There was a large amount of blood around him and on his clothing, and I also noticed that there was a large portion of the back of his head was missing.
And with respect to the female that's lying on the floor in front of him?
On the female, again, it was the large amount of blood that I noticed. She also had some very large wounds on her that were not bleeding at all. I did not notice any respiration from her either. I was able to look at her one eye. It appeared to be fixed, and she appeared to have one or two maybe wounds to the head also.
Did you come to any conclusions about the nature of the wounds, the type of weapon used?
Yes, I had a feeling that a shotgun had been used.
Now, when you say you have a feeling, what is it that you base that feeling on?
In this photograph here, you can see a louvered door. It's a wooden door. And from my position when I looked, I could see what I recognized to be a shot pattern or a portion of a shot pattern in that door, which indicated to me a shotgun.
Have you shot shotguns yourself?
Many times.
So you're familiar with what sort of shot would come out of a shotgun?
Yes.
And did that appear to be the type of shot that you're familiar with?
Yes.
Now, when you shoot a shotgun, is there smoke involved?
Quite a bit.
Did you see any smoke that night in that room?
No, none at all.
Did you smell smoke?
No.
You can be seated. Sergeant West, did you at any time touch either of the persons depicted in that photograph?
No, I did not.
Did any of your fellow officers that were involved in the search team ever move either of those persons?
No, they did not.
Believing at that point that there had been shotguns used in this...
Objection, restates the testimony.
I haven't heard the question.
I'll continue. Believing that a shotgun was used here, did you look around that scene to determine whether or not there were any shell casings located in that area?
Yes, I did.
Were there any?
I didn't observe any.
Now, as you entered into that family room, what do you recall about the interior?
Primarily that the lights were on as I entered, and there was a television, which I guess would have been on the north wall of the family room, that was also on.
As the sofa in that exhibit shows, there's a male who is seated on that sofa, correct?
That's correct.
With respect to the television set, where would that have been located?
It would be directly across from you.
Would he have been facing the television set then?
Yes.
Other than the television set being on and the light being on, what else did you notice about that room?
Other than that, that's the things that stick out the most in my mind.
Could you actually hear the television?
Oh, yes.
So it was on and the volume was on as well.
Yes, it was.
When was it that you first noticed that the television was on? Could you hear something coming from that room prior to entering into the room?
When I was at the front doors of the house, prior to even going in, I could hear the television on at that time.
At the front door?
Yes.
At some point, did you complete your search of that particular room, the family room?
Yes.
And what did you do then?
After we completed the family room, then I moved on into a kitchen area and searched that area, on to the back of the house, which I believe there's maid's quarters there. Searched that. Came back through the kitchen area. There's a dining room. We searched the dining room. Came back up to that small den that I'd closed the doors on initially. We did a search of that. And then we went back and did a more thorough search of the living room.
These are all rooms that you just indicated were on the first floor, is that correct?
That's correct.
Is there a second floor?
Yes.
And after doing the searches that you've indicated so far, did you then go upstairs?
Yes.
And would you describe for the jurors what you did?
That was at that point, prior to going upstairs, that's when I brought in the additional backup officers. Myself and Officer Steve Miller actually went up the staircase, and we had the other officers covering us as we went up. As I recall, the first room that we actually searched was, it was like a master bedroom suite. As I recall, the light was on in that room, and the only thing that we really saw in there was a small dog in the room. We continued to search the upstairs area, and we came across a closet up there. I'm not sure exactly which room it was in. I remember it had mirrored wardrobe type doors on it, and the only thing of note that we really found in there were two .22 caliber rifles in that closet. And after that, we just continued the sweep of the upstairs and searched the remaining bedrooms.
Sergeant West, I'm going to show you another photograph. Appears to be the interior of 722 Northbound. Do you recognize what's depicted in that photograph?
That is what I described as the foyer.
And from the foyer...
That photograph will be marked Exhibit 8.
Thank you, Your
Mark
Honor.
it out, please. Have you done that?
I will. From that foyer, could you see into the family room?
You can see a portion of the family room. You can't see the entire room, though.
Sergeant West, when you went into that family room that night, were the doors open?
On the family room, yes, they were.
Are there two doors that lead into that room?
I believe they're double doors on that room.
So they were open,
Yes.
and from that vantage point, could you see the television set on?
No, I actually couldn't see the screen of it. I could see light coming from it.
And you could hear it?
Yes.
Now, you indicated that you went to the rear of the house, is that correct?
Yes, after we searched the main house.
And there was a guest house behind the main house?
Yes.
And I have another photograph, may I have that marked as Exhibit 9?
Yes.
Do you recognize what's depicted in Exhibit 9, sir?
Yes, I do.
And what is that?
It shows a walkway that leads to a small guest house at the back. On the right is the swimming pool. On the left are the tennis courts.
And what is it that you noticed about the guest house on that night, on the 20th of August?
In the guest house, the doors there were also open and the lights were on.
Did you actually go into the guest house?
Yes.
And did you examine the interior?
Yes.
What, if anything, did you find of note?
We didn't find anything in the guest house.
Nothing further this time around.
Cross-examination?
Sergeant West, you went into the house primarily to conduct a search for other victims or possible suspects, correct?
That's correct.
But in the course of conducting this search, you were able to really view the entire interior of the residence. Is that
Yes.
also correct? And you were able to make certain observations about what the residence in 722 North Elm looked like. Is that
Yes.
correct? Right. Taking you back to the search of the upstairs area, you mentioned that there was a closet that had mirrored doors that you saw 2 rifles.
Yes.
Do you now recall what room it was, or what room of the upstairs it was that you saw the closet with the rifles?
No, I don't recall which room.
Were you, you indicated that the first room that you went into upstairs was what you believed to be the master bedroom. Is that correct?
That's correct.
I have 2 photographs that I've previously shown to counsel that I'm going to mark as Exhibit 10A and 10B. May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Thank you. Your Honor, we will be substituting large photographs of these at some time in the future. Sergeant West, let me show you a photograph that's been marked as Exhibit 10A. Do you recognize what's shown in that photograph?
That appears to be the room I described as a master bedroom.
All right, and I'm also showing you 10B. Does that also appear to be the room that you've described as the master bedroom?
Yes, it does.
And do those photographs accurately depict what the master bedroom looked like when you first went into it on the evening of August 20th?
Yeah, I believe they would.
Does looking at Exhibits 10A and 10B refresh your recollection about the location of the closets with the mirrored doors?
No, it doesn't.
Were the closets with the mirrored doors open or closed?
Closed.
And you had to open up the door in order to find the rifles?
Correct.
And these were 2 .22 caliber rifles?
Yes.
Were they standing or lying? Could you tell us where in the closet they were?
As I recall, they were standing and just more or less leaning against the wall.
All right, so that they were standing, leaning against the wall. Did you examine the rifles at the time you were making this search?
No, I did not.
Did you examine them at any subsequent time?
No, I did not.
Are you able to tell us whether or not those rifles were loaded?
No.
Where in the closet were they physically located? They were so that you could see them easily when you opened the closet, right?
Yes.
You didn't have to search through any clothes to find them.
No.
Now, directing your attention briefly let me withdraw that. Did you write a report about your activities on the evening of August 20th, right after these events?
Yes.
Okay. And in that report, you mentioned finding the rifles in the closet, correct?
That's correct.
Do you recall whether or not in the report you also stated what bedroom it was that you located the rifles in?
I don't, I may have at that time, but I'm not sure, though.
Do you think that looking at your report might help you remember?
Yes.
Okay. May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Does that, thank you. Does that first paragraph of the report help you remember where the closet with the mirrored doors was located?
Yes.
And where was it?
That indicates in there that it was a north side bedroom.
Okay. Does that north side bedroom correspond to the location of the master bedroom?
No, the master bedroom really is more at the east end or east side of the house.
Now, directing your attention to another bedroom on the second floor. You have a present recollection of a bedroom that was relatively messy.
Not a specific recollection of it, no.
I have a series of 5 photographs which I've marked 11A through E, and which I've previously shown counsel. Can I approach, Your Honor? I'm going to show you a photograph of a bedroom that's been marked 11A. Would you look at that and tell us if you recognize it?
It looks familiar, yes.
Okay, and is that a photograph of a bedroom at 722 North Elm?
It appears to be.
Okay, and is that an upstairs bedroom?
Yes.
And where, if you recall, where in the house was that bedroom located? North, south, east, west?
I couldn't recall specifically where in the upstairs that's located.
All right, I'm going to show you some more photographs that are going to be marked 11B through E. Would you look at those and tell us, they all appear to be photographs of that one particular bedroom on the second floor at 722 North Elm Street?
Yes, they do.
All right, and is that a bedroom that you now recall seeing when you were there on the night of August 20th?
I believe so, yes.
And do those photographs all show the bedroom the way you remember seeing it when you first arrived at the house?
I'd say so, yes.
Okay. And that is a bedroom that appears to be, at least from the photographs, pretty messy.
Yes.
The drawers are open and things are dumped on the floor. Is that correct?
Yes, there are drawers open and items on the floor.
I'm going to show you a photograph of a bathroom that's been shown to counsel. I'm marking Exhibit 12. Would you look at this photograph and see if you recognize having seen that particular room at 722 North Elm?
No, I don't recall seeing this room.
Okay. And I have Exhibit 13, which is also a picture of a room. Would you look at Exhibit 13 and tell us whether you recall seeing this particular room at 722 North Elm?
No, I don't specifically recall this room either.
Does there seem to be something on the floor of the room that's shown in Exhibit 13?
There are, in the photograph here, there are 3 black marks on the carpet.
Do those black marks appear to be dog droppings?
It's hard to tell from the photograph.
Now, directing your attention to the guest house area, you indicated that you went out there and you found nothing remarkable.
Correct.
Could you tell us about the condition of the guest house? That is, what did it look like?
I do remember the upstairs on the guest house was messy also.
Okay. It was, it appeared to be extremely, in extremely messy condition, possibly ransacked, I believe is a term that might describe the condition. Tell me if I'm wrong.
I don't think I would have characterized it as ransacked.
Okay. Did you write a report about the condition of the guest house as you remembered it from being there on August 20th.
I may have. I don't know if I included a description at that
All
time.
right, let me approach and show you another page of the handwritten report. Do you also recognize this as being your handwriting?
Yes,
And that's the report that you wrote right after these events, correct?
correct.
Would you read the highlighted portion of that to yourself, and then I'll ask you a question.
Okay.
Do you recall now whether or not you described the condition of the guest house as possibly ransacking? You couldn't tell whether it was poor housekeeping or ransacking.
That's correct.
May I just have a moment, Ron?
Yes.
Thank you. I have nothing further. Thank you, Ron.
For the cross-examination?
Sergeant West, is the reason that you didn't examine those rifles because that wasn't your job that night?
Well, essentially, I realized we were dealing with a crime scene. My training has told me that you disturb as little in a crime scene as you possibly can, because that's going to be handled by detectives.
So would it have been the detective's responsibility to check out that evidence and do whatever they were going to do with it?
Yes,
Your responsibility was to just make the initial observations and make sure no one touched anything, correct?
correct.
Now, do you remember who the detective was in charge of the investigation that night?
No, I don't.
Was Detective Zoeller present at the crime scene at some point?
I believe he was.
And was he somehow in charge of the crime scene, if you recall?
I don't recall.
Do you recall having a conversation with him that night after you made your observations of this rifle in the closet?
Yes,
And do you remember telling him that you saw inside the master dressing room closet two .22 caliber rifles?
I probably did, yes.
And is that, having refreshed your recollection with that statement, does that help you remember where those rifles were?
Thinking back on it, the way the house is laid out, it's such a large house. I'm really not sure if it was a separate bedroom or if it was an offshoot of the master bedroom. The thing I primarily remember was the mirrored doors.
And when you made this statement, that would have been very shortly after you made your observations, correct?
Yes,
Would it be fair to say that your memory then was much better than it is today, 4 years ago, as to what you observed and where?
yes.
That's all I have, thank you.
Can you redirect?
Thank you, Your Honor. Sergeant West, when you saw the guns in this upstairs bedroom closet, did you at any time pick up the guns?
No,
You just made the observation?
correct.
And I think you've indicated that it was the detective's job to go through a more thorough search.
That's correct.
Did you indicate that you brought it to someone's attention that you made that observation?
Yes, I believe I did.
When you thought that somebody other than yourself, for example, a detective, would do a more thorough investigation, who did you have in mind?
There would have been a number of detectives there. I don't know exactly who would have, been actually responsible for it at that time, as to what rank.
With respect to the photographs shown to you by defense counsel, exhibits 11A through E, you have those in front of you still?
Yes,
You indicated that it appeared to be a pretty messy room.
the original ones, the ones that are depicted, the room that has the oriental carpet on the floor, yes.
Did you believe that perhaps a burglary had taken place at that location?
No,
And when you went into the guest house, and you indicated that there was perhaps ransacking or maybe poor housekeeping, did you think that maybe there was a burglary in that structure?
no.
I have nothing further.
My name is Richard William Catalani, C-A-T-A-L-A-N-I.
Mr. Catalani, what do you do for a living, please?
I'm a criminalist employed by the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department.
What kind of education or training did you obtain in order to be hired as a criminalist, sir?
I have a bachelor's degree from California State University at Northridge. My major is in biology, my minor is in chemistry. Following graduation, I did a 12-month internship in toxicology at SmithKline Clinical Laboratories, where I was employed until 1985. In 1985, I was hired by the Sheriff's Department. I've worked in the toxicology, narcotics, serology sections, and I'm currently assigned to the firearms identification section.
How long were you assigned to the serology section, sir?
Approximately 4 years.
Could you tell the jury, please, what a criminalist is?
A criminalist is a person that gathers and analyzes physical evidence and prepares a report for presentation in court.
Now, I noticed that you said that you work for the Sheriff's Department and not the Beverly Hills Police Department. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Are there certain police agencies within the County of Los Angeles who contract with the Sheriff's Department to perform certain criminalist functions for them?
Laboratory services, yes, that's true.
And so that's fairly common for a police department that is smaller than the Sheriff's or the Los Angeles Police Department.
Yes, it is.
Were you asked to make a comparison or analyze a substance found on a pair of tennis shoes?
Yes, I was.
Your Honor, may I approach, please, and mark this next exhibit, which is a paper bag, and its contents is Exhibit 11, please?
Exhibit 14.
Oh, I'm sorry. Your Honor, I've now placed an evidence sticker on the bag. May I approach, please?
Yes.
By the way, Mr. Catalani, before I show this to you, have you ever qualified as an expert in the analysis of blood before in court?
Yes, I have.
How many times would you say you've qualified?
Approximately 35 or 40 times.
And you've were in the serology department approximately 4 years, is that correct?
Yes.
Showing you the contents of this bag, which is People's 14, I'd like you to, I will actually remove the contents, which is another bag, which is smaller. It seems to have, among other writings, your signature on it and the date 12/12/90. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay, and removing the contents of this bag, I'd like to ask you if you recognize the items which are contained within the smaller bag.
Yes, I do.
And could you describe them briefly for the record, please?
It's a pair of white women's tennis shoes with bloodstains.
Okay, and how do you know they're bloodstains?
I did a test to determine that they were indeed human blood.
Were you able to determine any further kinds of blood typing so that someone could identify them more particularly?
No, I was not.
You weren't correct?
I was unable to determine any other blood typing results.
All right, well, why was that?
I don't know. It could be that the length of storage between the deposit of the blood and the time of analysis was too great. The samples may have deteriorated. I tested blood stains that I located on both the bottoms and the tops of both of the shoes.
And did you determine that there was, in fact, human blood on the bottom and the tops of both of the shoes?
Yes, I did.
And that was as far as you could get with your analysis?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. I have nothing further of this witness.
Cross-examination?
Mr. Catalani, you opined that perhaps the reason why you couldn't get further blood typing on those stains on the shoes was the deterioration due to the passage of time. Is that one of your theories?
Yeah, that's one of the possibilities, yes.
When were those shoes first submitted to the Sheriff's Department by the Beverly Hills Police?
I believe in September of 1990.
And did you do your testing on them in September of 1990?
If I may refer to my notes, I can give you an exact date.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor, to see what he's referring to?
Certainly.
Thank you.
I have some handwritten notes on laboratory paper that indicate that I started my testing on them on December 12th of 1990.
And do you have any indication of when you received the articles from the Beverly Hills Police Department?
Yes, I have a laboratory receipt. It shows that they were submitted on September 21st of 1990.
Now, let me ask you a hypothetical. If this were a sheriff's investigation case and they had removed items that they suspected had blood on them from a crime scene on August 20th, okay? Ordinarily, would they turn those items with suspected blood over to the laboratory within 24 hours?
Position irrelevant.
Sustained.
Is there a need to refrigerate suspected blood in order to keep it from deteriorating?
Yes, the best storage conditions are dried and then frozen.
Okay. And is there a protocol in the sheriff's laboratory for how soon after obtaining suspected blood evidence it should be subject to this preservation method?
As soon as possible.
When you received these items on September 21st, did you have any information from the Beverly Hills Police Department as to when they had been gathered?
I believe I did, but I don't recall what that time frame was at this point.
After you received them, how were they stored?
In frozen storage.
And your examination was conducted in December of 1990?
Yes.
And when did you prepare a report revealing the results of that examination, that the stains were human blood?
I have several reports, the first of which was December 20th, 1990.
And did you do a supplemental report?
Yes, I did.
And what's the date of that one?
February 1st, 1992.
Thank you. May I have a moment, Your Honor?
Yes.
I have nothing for you.
I just have a quick question.
All right.
Mr. Catalani, I think you indicated that you're...
Wait, hold on. Did you have any questions, Mr. Bird?
I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
You said you were a criminalist?
Yes,
is that
sir.
right? And you said a criminalist is someone who gathers evidence?
On occasions, yes.
Did you gather any evidence in this case?
No, sir, I did
As
not.
in going to the crime scene and looking and see what happened?
No, sir, I did not.
Is your department somehow connected with the Beverly Hills Police Department so that if a criminalist is needed at a crime scene, you or someone in your capacity would go out and help them investigate a crime scene?
We are available to, yes.
Do they have their own criminalist?
I'm not exactly sure what they have.
In any event, you weren't asked to go out and evaluate this crime scene, is that correct?
That's correct.
Were you ever asked to look at any photographs of the crime scene to see what you as a criminalist could tell about it?
I have seen some of the photographs. I was not asked to draw an opinion from those photographs.
Nobody asked you to make any opinions based on your expertise?
Not from the photographs, no.
That's all I have, thank you.
Any redirect?
Briefly. Mr. Catalani, I believe you testified that your receipt indicates the shoes were received on December the 21st.
September the 21st.
Thank you. You may step down. You're excused.
Thank you.
The people called Detective Leslie Zoeller to the stand.
Ms. Rachel, you do solemnly swear that the testimony you may give in the cause now pending before this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Please take the stand and state your name for the record.
Leslie H. Zoeller, Z-O-E-L-L-E-R.
Detective Zoeller, what do you do for a living, please?
I am a police officer for the City of Beverly Hills assigned to the Detective Division.
As of right now, how long have you been a police officer?
20 and a half years.
How many years have you been at Beverly Hills?
17 and a half years.
And prior to that, did you work for the Gardena Police Department?
That's correct.
Back on the 20th of August of 1989, were you assigned as a detective for the Beverly Hills Police Department?
Yes, I was.
And what was your particular assignment at that time, please?
I was assigned to the Robbery Homicide Division.
In the early morning hours of the 21st of August of 1989, did you respond to the location at 722 North Elm Drive in the City of Beverly Hills and the County of Los Angeles?
Yes, I did.
When you got to that particular location, did you notice if any other police officers were already there?
Yes.
Okay. As a detective, did you have a different kind of duty from a patrol officer?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And when you respond to a scene such as the one we're going to talk about, do you arrive in a uniform or are you wearing a suit or how
I
are
wear
you?
a suit.
Okay. And as a detective, what are your responsibilities as they differ from somebody who works patrol?
At a crime scene, my responsibility is, one, to take the crime scene over from patrol officers and to investigate and direct the investigation at the crime scene.
Now, when you got to this particular location, do you remember about what time it was that you finally arrived?
It's approximately 1 a.m. on the 21st of August.
And at the time, did you have a partner detective named Tom Lenahan?
Yes.
Do you remember if you arrived before or after him? If you
We
recall?
both arrived at the same time. We met at the station.
And, and when you got there, did you in fact take command of the crime scene?
Yes.
In that regard, did you supervise the collection of evidence?
Yes.
Now, in photographs which were placed on the board this morning, did you recognize the two decedents in the photograph?
Yes, I did.
And within that room, did you direct the collection of evidence?
Yes.
First of all, let me ask you this. Did you look for any expended shotgun shells?
Yes.
Did you find any expended shotgun shells?
No, I did not.
Did you collect or direct to be collected the shoes from Mrs. Menendez? Or was that done elsewhere?
That was done elsewhere.
And was that done at the coroner's office?
That's correct.
In your presence?
Yes.
Your Honor, may I approach, please, with Exhibit 14? I'm showing you the two shoes which have been marked as the contents of the paper bag, which is People's 14. Do you recognize these shoes, sir?
Yes, I do.
And were they, in fact, taken by you from the coroner's office to be booked at Beverly Hills Police Department?
Yes.
And later on, were they referred to the Sheriff's Department for analysis?
Yes, they were.
In addition to collecting this pair of shoes, did you also, at the crime scene in the early morning hours of the 21st, collect something having to do with shotgun ammunition?
Yes.
Okay, could you briefly tell the jury what you collected and what your understanding is of it?
Let me clarify that I myself did not do the collection of the evidence itself, that I had the Beverly Hills Identification Bureau do the collection. I, as an investigator, direct them in what evidence to collect.
Okay, and they wear gloves and use tweezers and things like that?
That's correct.
Okay. Did you ask them to collect wadding from the crime scene?
Yes, I did.
Okay, could you briefly tell the jury what wadding is?
Wadding is a component within a shotgun shell where, if I could explain how the shotgun shell is made up, there's a plastic tube, which is the shotgun shell itself. On the bottom is the primer, or the brass plate, which has the primer in it. Then on top of the primer is the gunpowder. On top of the powder is wadding. And then that wadding is also called spacers. There's, depending on the shot of the shotgun shell, is dependent upon how much wadding or spacers there are. And then there's a spacer that holds the shotgun pellets themselves.
So the spacer separates the gunpowder from the pellets?
Correct.
And to your knowledge, it's made out of various things depending on the manufacturer?
Yes.
Do you recall approximately how many waddings were collected from the scene?
Your Honor, at this point, I'm going to object. I don't think this witness's expertise has been demonstrated in the area of ballistics, so that you could offer an opinion as to how many total waddings were collected.
Okay, I'll rephrase the question. How many pieces of wadding were collected at the crime scene?
13.
Did you also attend the autopsy of Mr. and Mrs. Menendez?
Yes, I did.
And they were conducted on the same day?
No, they were not.
But you attended both of them, is that correct?
That's correct.
And did you, in fact, collect pieces of wadding from the coroner after having retrieved them from the bodies?
Yes.
And how many pieces of wadding did you retrieve?
From the bodies themselves, there was 2, and I believe there was one additional one that was within the clothing of Jose Menendez.
Okay. And did you book those items into evidence?
Yes, I did.
In addition to collecting wadding, both from the crime scene and from the coroner's office, did you also collect some pellets at the crime scene?
Yes.
Okay, and generally, where were the pellets collected from?
From around the bodies. It was collected from within the couch, on the floor. I don't believe we requested they dig out any from the walls.
All right. I'm going to back up. Your Honor, I have a series. I have 2 photographs that are identical. I'd like them to be marked as, I think, exhibit 15, please.
Yes.
Okay, I'll show these to counsel. Detective Zoeller, showing you this photograph, I'd like you to ask you to recognize what's depicted in it. And I'll put one on the board as long as I have 2.
Yes.
Okay, and could you tell me what that is, please?
It's a photograph of the bottom of the tennis shoe, which has been previously marked.
All right, and those are the tennis shoes that you referred to in your testimony as Exhibit 14, is that correct?
That's correct.
And is that the condition or the placement of the tennis shoe as you saw it at the crime scene in the early morning hours of the 21st of August?
Yes.
Now, referring back to the items that you collected or directed to be collected, did you bring those here to court today, or did you actually get them from a criminalist today?
The tennis shoes you're referring to?
No, I'm sorry. I'm talking about the wadding and the pellets.
I brought them up to court. They were brought by the criminalist to court, or to the courthouse.
Your Honor, I have here 2 envelopes. That's marked the first one as Exhibit 16, and the second one is Exhibit 17, please.
All right, the envelopes and their contents, 16 and 17.
Thank you. May I approach, please, Your Honor?
Yes.
Showing you first Exhibit 16. Would you please open the envelope and indicate what you're doing for the record?
Okay, I'm opening the envelope, which is sealed by a Los Angeles County Sheriff Scientific Services Bureau Criminalist Laboratory seal. And I'm taking out the contents, which are numerous envelopes.
Your Honor, for the clerk, should I label these A through whatever?
Yes.
All right. The first one I'm going to label as 16A. For the record, the tag indicates shotgun pellet. I'm not going to ask the detective to open it. Okay. And this is a Beverly Hills Police Department property tag. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. And normally those tags indicate what's inside. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right.
Your Honor, could I ask the counsel identify what the Beverly Hills receipt number is on these envelopes?
Okay, the register number on this particular one is, they all have the same number. Register number 29144.
Is there an item number?
Okay,
And
counsel, you can get that later on. She's not opening each one individually at this point, so you can do that at the recess or something. Go ahead.
Okay, 16A is item 24, 16B is item 21. Could you please, I'm not going to have you open all of these, but as an example, would you open 16B and indicate to us what you find inside, please?
Again, this envelope is secured by a Los Angeles County tag, and I'm trying to rip it open without destroying it. And inside are 3 individual plastic envelopes, clear plastic. One of them has 2 distorted pellets. Another envelope has a piece of white plastic. And the third envelope has a portion of a spacer or a wadding.
Okay, now,
Just for the record, that is Exhibit 16B,
yes, that's correct, Your Honor.
and it has item number on it for counsel's benefit of what?
I think 21. Let me look again. Yes, item 21. Okay.
I might add that the 3 clear plastic envelopes are individually listed 21A, B, and C.
And 21 is the item number for the tag, correct?
Correct.
All right. Now, do you know, first of all, referring to the item number 21C, there's a piece of white plastic. Do you know what that is?
Specifically, no. We assumed at the time, because there was other pieces of white plastic, that was a plastic bracelet.
Okay. So this isn't part of a person or anything. This is just plastic, right?
Correct.
Okay. And then referring to, you talked about 2 distorted pellets. That would be item 21B. And lastly, you said there's a spacer or wadding, which appears to be some sort of paper-type substance in 21A. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. I'm going to replace those in the envelope, Your Honor, and staple it shut.
I ripped it open.
And our next one is item 11, and I'd like this as 16C, please. All right, this appears to be a shotgun wad, so could you open 16C, please, and remove the contents?
This one in particular is only secured by a staple, which I'm taking out. And inside is a plastic wadding.
Okay. Your Honor, for the record, this smaller envelope says item number 11 on it, and that's the only thing inside of the envelope. I'm holding it up. It's a piece of plastic. So I think you indicated earlier that wadding is sometimes made of plastic and sometimes made of paper.
That's correct.
Okay. So now we've seen two examples, the paper and the plastic. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right.
Certainly.
All right, moving along, I'm going to continue to mark and perhaps open a couple more. $16D will be a shotgun pellet. It's item 3, and I'm not going to open it. 16E indicates a shotgun wad. I'm not going to open this. This is item number 14. 16F.
You don't have to mark things now if you're not using them with this witness. So let's just get to something that you will be referring to in his testimony at this point.
All right, Your Honor, that's fine. May I just have a moment, please?
Yes. She put a mark on it. You can look at it later on and verify what it is. There's no need to go through marking exhibits at this point. It can be done when counsel have time at a recess rather than with a jury in the box.
All right, Your Honor, for the record then, I've marked 16A through F, and there are 13 other envelopes contained within 16. Okay? Now, Detective Zoeller, when you were inside of the home, did you also conduct a search of that home to see what was inside?
Yes.
And did you see some rifles inside of the house?
Yes, I did.
Could you describe for the jury where you found those rifles?
They were in the master bedroom dressing area, which had the walk-in closets, and they were on the northern portion of the closet on the east side of the dressing room, and they were standing up.
Okay. Did you physically examine those rifles?
Yes.
And did you notice whether or not they were loaded?
They were not loaded.
Okay. Did you seize those rifles?
I did not.
Why not?
Because the crime scene was the family room. It was determined that it didn't go any further than the family room, and the weapons that were used for the murder was a shotgun.
And the items that you saw in the closet were rifles, is that correct?
.22 caliber rifles, correct.
In addition to looking at the wadding and collecting or ordering the collection of the pellets, did you look for shotgun shells?
Yes.
Did you see any shotgun shells?
No, I did not.
Okay. And were you specifically interested in looking for shotgun shells?
Yes.
Okay. About how long were you at the crime scene that day?
Approximately 8 or 9 hours.
During that 8 or 9 hour period, did you ever leave the crime scene and go somewhere else and then come back? Or were you there continuously?
From the immediate crime scene area, which was the family room, I had left, but I never left the property at 722.
Okay. When you got to the scene at approximately 1 a.m., did you see either of the two defendants there at that time?
No, I did not.
Okay. When is the first time that you saw them that day?
First time that I had seen them was at approximately 5:30 in the morning on the 21st.
And where were you physically located when you first saw them?
I was in the family room at the time.
Okay. And
when I saw them, they were, I'm not sure whether they were at the front of the house or at the rear of the house. An officer had come to tell me that they were there, and I went out to speak to him.
okay, and at this time you don't recall if it was the front or the back?
I don't know.
Okay. At that time, did you let them into the house?
No, I did not,
Why not?
because we were still conducting an investigation.
Do you recall about what time the coroner's representative showed up?
It was at 4:45 in the morning of the 21st.
All right, and do you know at what time that he finished with his work and left?
At approximately 6:45 the same morning.
Now, when you spoke, or when you first saw the defendants at about 5:30 a.m., did you send them away?
Yes,
Okay, when's the next time you saw them?
at 8:30 in the morning that same day.
And were you, I take it you were still at the home, is that correct?
That's correct.
And where were they when you saw them at 8:30?
They had come to the house, and again, I'm not sure whether they came to the front or the rear of the house.
And did you have any conversation with them?
Yes.
Okay, now when you had this conversation with them, were they together?
Yes, they were.
Okay. By the way, did you look at their clothes? Did you look at their clothes that day, that early morning?
Cursory, but not, I didn't inspect them, no.
Okay. Did you see any blood on them?
I did not, no.
And when they came back at 8:30 in the morning, did they ask you if they could have entry to the house?
Yes.
And what did you tell them?
At that point, we allowed access to the house.
Okay. Did you allow access into all portions of the house?
We were still working in the family room, and the doors were closed, and I told them that they could have access to the entire house when we were done, but I cautioned them about the family room.
Okay. Did they ask you if they could get something from the house?
Yes.
Okay. And did they tell you from where they wanted to get this thing or things?
Yes.
Okay. What did they say?
I'm going to object, Your Honor. I'm asking the police saying
Try to be more specific.
Okay. Do you recall which of the two made the request?
I don't know.
All right. Were they together when the request was made?
Yes.
Okay. And when the request was made, did either of the two brothers indicate that they did not want to go along with the request?
objection, Your Honor. That's leading.
Overruled. You understand the question?
Yes.
Okay. Is that yes, you understand the question, or yes to the question?
Yes, I understand the question.
Okay. Do you want me to say it again?
Please.
Okay. One of the two made a request of you, and you don't recall which. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And did the other one disavow or in any way try to negate the request of the other brother?
I'm going to object again, Your Honor, because it's also vague. Calling for speculation.
Overruled.
No, he did not object to the question.
And what was the question asked?
The question was to retrieve items from within the house, and then it was narrowed down that the items to be retrieved were in the family room.
Okay. And were you made aware of what items were requested?
Yes.
What?
Can I clarify that at the time that request was made, it was not at 8:30, it was at 5:30 in the morning?
All right. And at 5:30 in the morning when the request was made, what was the request?
The request was to pick up some items. Those items in particular were tennis equipment.
When you were inside of the crime scene, did you in fact see some sort of tennis equipment?
Yes.
Okay. Your Honor, may I have a moment, please?
Yes.
I just need a moment to get something. Your Honor, I can't find what I need right now. I'll just continue on.
All right.
Now, at 5:30 in the morning, when it was requested of you that tennis rackets be retrieved, or tennis equipment be retrieved from the family room, what did you say?
Because it was in the family room, I didn't want to relinquish anything that was in there because the investigation had not been complete yet.
Sometime after the 21st of August, did you go to the Century City 14 Theater to recover some records?
Yes.
Okay. Your Honor, I have here two sets of two exhibits. I'd like to mark them as people's next in order, please.
18.
Should I mark all of them as 18? They're related. 18, I'll do 18A and B.
All right.
Can I approach the
Yes.
I'm going to put 18A on the board and give you the other copy. And then 18B. I'll give you this. Are these blow-ups of the records that you retrieved sometime after the 21st of August?
Yes.
And 18A has a handwritten notation on the left side of it, which indicates, and part of it's cut off, but could you tell us what that indication is under the movie License to Kill?
The notation is, I believe the beginning of the numbers was 175, or 17 is missing, and then there's 5, and then there's a 30 below it with a line, and obviously a subtraction is 145.
And what are the words?
The words is sold out.
Okay. And 18B, would you please refer to that, which is a blow-up as well for the movie Batman. And do you see some writing off to the left?
Yes,
And is that writing not sold out?
that's correct.
Okay. And you retrieved these, do you remember how long after the 20th it was that you retrieved these?
I don't specifically remember the date. It was within 2 weeks after the 21st.
Counsel, will you stipulate that these are true and correct business records from the Century 14 theaters?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Did you also at some point retrieve some business records from U.S. Sprint?
Yes.
And Your Honor, I have here one document 2 times. I'd like to mark this as People's 19, please.
Yes.
Detective Zoeller, I'd like to ask you if you recognize the portion in the middle of the page of this exhibit.
Yes, I do.
Now, at some time did you determine that there were phone booths at the Santa Monica Civic Center?
Yes.
And did you obtain records relating to phone calls utilizing that phone booth?
Yes.
And the exhibit 19, which you have in front of you, is this a copy of some records that you retrieved regarding 2 phone calls made from the Santa Monica Civic?
Yes.
At this time, counsel, will you stipulate that exhibit 19 contains phone records of 2 phone calls from phone number area code 213-394-9911, that phone number is for a phone booth at the Santa Monica Civic, that these phone records reflect charges made on a U.S. Sprint card belonging to Jose Menendez?
So stipulated. So stipulated.
Thank you. I marked another exhibit, but I haven't had you open it. It's exhibit number 17. Could you open this exhibit and describe for the record what you're doing, please?
It's an envelope which has the Los Angeles County seal on it, which I am tearing the seal. And opening it are 3 smaller envelopes that are also sealed.
And these appear to also contain shotgun wad, shotgun pellets, and shotgun pellets and wad. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, were these retrieved from the coroner's office?
Yes, they were.
Okay, so all of the items contained in People 17 were retrieved by you, actually retrieved by someone else and given to you. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Can I have a moment, please, Ryan?
Yes.
Detective Zoeller, how many people from the identification unit of the Beverly Hills Police Department were called to this scene to assist in the gathering of evidence?
3.
And did you visualize, look at, observe every piece of evidence at the site before it was gathered?
With the exception of the shotgun pellets, I would say that I did.
And did you cause a series of photographs to be taken of each item of evidence before it was gathered?
Yes.
And in those photographs, well, let me back up a minute, did you ascribe a number to each item of evidence that was photographed?
I didn't, but that's customary for the Identification Bureau to do that.
And was a series of photographs generated where the photos depict a number label next to an item of evidence?
Yes.
Now, did you personally look for items of ballistics evidence apart from expended shotgun shells?
I don't understand.
You testified on direct that you personally looked to see if there were any expended shotgun shell casings.
Yes.
You did that yourself?
In conjunction with Identification Bureau, yes.
Okay, they were there when you did that.
We all did it together.
And were the decedents still there when you did that?
Yes.
Then I take it you didn't move them or the couch cushions at that point to look for any evidence?
That's correct.
After the decedents were removed, did you personally participate in moving any of the furniture, lifting up any cushions, anything like that?
I was there when the Identification Bureau took the cushions off, moved the couches, and looked for items, additional items.
Now, did the Beverly Hills Police Department at any time take custody of any of the furniture in that room?
No, we did not.
Do you know whether or not the identification unit people cut open the couch or the couch cushions to see if there were pellets in those?
I don't think they did, no.
Were you aware at any subsequent time of any persons who had access to the location coming to the Beverly Hills Police Department with additional pellets that they had found?
Nobody came to the Beverly Hills Police Department.
Now, you said you did not instruct them to remove any pellets from the walls.
That's correct.
Did you observe any pellets in the walls?
None in the wall, but I did observe pellets in the louvered windows on the south wall.
Did you observe pellets, or did you observe the holes made by pellets?
Both.
And did you collect the pellets that you observed?
We didn't dig them out, but those that were on the floor we did collect, yes.
Did you take photographs of the ones that you didn't dig out?
There are photographs of the damage to the louvered windows.
Yes. Do those photos depict the pellets that you saw somehow embedded in the louvers?
I don't think the photos specifically were to show the pellets. So if the photos show the pellets, it just happened that they did.
Did you write any kind of report that documented how many pellets, for example, you observed that were embedded in the louvers?
No.
Let me just see if we have some clarification. This particular room had a wall that had a series of French doors on it. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And covering the French doors were a form of shutter, these louvers that you're talking about.
That's correct.
And they were made of wood.
Yes.
And you observed, did you not, when you got to the scene, that some of the slats of these shutters were damaged or broken?
Yes.
And did you also observe the glass of the French doors that was behind these shutters to see if any of the panes of glass were damaged?
Yes.
And were they?
Yes, they were.
And did you, therefore, check outside those doors for ballistic evidence?
Yes.
And was any ballistic evidence gathered from outside the French doors?
Only photographs.
And what do the photographs depict?
the pellet holes into a tree against the south border fence at the border of the property.
Am I correct in stating that if you go outside those French doors, directly across from those French doors in a southerly direction is a large tree?
Correct.
And you saw some evidence of things that had struck the trunk of the tree?
Correct.
And you assumed, did you not, that those were pellets?
Yes.
Were any of those dug out?
No.
And beyond that tree is the south fence that separated this property from 720 Elm Drive, the next house south?
Correct.
Did you observe, strike that, there is outside these French doors a patio type area, is that right?
That's correct.
And did you examine that area visually?
Yes.
Did you examine it in daylight?
Yes.
And did you find any ballistics evidence such as waddings or plastic parts in that area?
No.
Now, Mrs. Bozanich earlier showed you what was originally your item 11. Do you think you could fish that out of 16? It's 16C. May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
I have 16C.
Okay. Did you seal that up after you had opened it before?
I think that it was stapled shut by the district attorney.
Okay, why don't you open that one up?
Okay, I took the staple out and I'm removing the content.
Now, you've referred to that particular item as a wad, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, is it also called a shot cup?
Yes.
And do you know what kind of shotgun ammunition is ordinarily contained in a shot cup such as that?
Yes.
And what kind is it?
Birdshot.
Birdshot. Is that correct?
Correct.
Which are very tiny pellets.
Little BBs, correct.
Now, you had described for Mrs. Bozanich the fact that you had also found some paper wadding. Is that right?
That's correct.
Do you recall if, let me just take a look at that. I believe 16B should contain a part, at least a part of paper wire.
Again, it's been resealed. Do you want me to reopen it?
Why don't you?
Okay.
Yes, I think.
I'm going to return item 11 or 16C back to its envelope.
Don't see it.
Okay. And I am taking the staple out of 16B and removing the items within it that are
out of that, why don't you take a look at 21A?
Okay, I have 21A, and it's a clear plastic envelope with a paper wadding,
May I see that for a moment?
or wad.
Okay, now that appears to be a piece. Let's see if we can knock it down. Okay, this little disc-like object is a segment, is it not, of a paper spacer, as you've described it?
Correct.
Okay. Now, there was a third kind of spacer or wadding that was located at the scene, is that right? Or are these the only two things, the shot cup and this kind of wad with which you're familiar?
The third type is just the plastic over powder spacer.
Okay, it doesn't look like
Or
what you're
wadding.
holding in your hand, though, which is,
No, this is actually 3 pieces in one, which, okay.
Why don't we see if we can find, let me see if Mrs. Blazanich cross-labeled any of the small plastic over-powder wads.
She did not.
She did not.
No.
Then why don't we look at 16, and let me see if I can find the smallest one. Try 5A.
Okay, I have 5 envelope containing 5A and B.
Has this has not been submarked yet?
No, it has not.
Your Honor, perhaps this one should then be marked 16G. Is that right?
All right.
Original item number 5A and B.
What happens, ladies and gentlemen, is when the police seize things or pick up things at a crime scene, they mark them with their own designations numerically, and then when they come into the courtroom, we have all other exhibits that all get mixed together, so we have to give them different numbering so that there is some confusion, but ultimately the exhibit numbers that we give them are the numbers that you will use to refer to them during the course of the trial. All right, you may proceed.
You wish me to open it?
Yes, I do.
Okay, I am taking the staple out of the top and opening it. I'm removing 2 plastic bags. B is a portion of the plastic, white plastic bracelet. 5A is the piece of plastic wad.
Okay, this is what we've talked, what you referred to before as an over-powder wad, and it's a disc of plastic, is it not?
Yes,
Okay, it's not a big column like item 11.
correct.
Let's compare. I don't know if the juries can see this, but there's a difference between these. Probably too far away. Okay, let's put that back first. What's this? Yeah.
No, I see. What we did is
What
we
did you
took 11 out. That goes there. This is 11, which goes.
Your Honor, for the record, may I staple these closed?
Yes.
Thank you.
Detective Zoeller, did you ever count up how many of those plastic over-powder wads, the disc-like ones that we just looked at, were collected in conjunction with this case, both from the scene and from the coroner's office?
No.
Now, you collected a series of, or your identification unit personnel collected pellets from the scene, correct?
That's correct.
Were they all the same size, or were they different sizes?
My recollection is they were all the same size, although I know there was birdshot there, but I'm not sure whether we collected any of the birdshot.
Would you have just left it if it had been seen?
No.
Okay. So to the best of your knowledge, all that was seen in the family room and proximity to it were non-birdshot pellets?
Correct.
Okay. And were those non-birdshot pellets larger pellets than birdshot?
Yes.
And were they all the ones that, to your knowledge, were all the larger pellets that you or other personnel from the Beverly Hills Police Department observed at that scene and in proximity picked up, other than the ones that we've talked about that weren't dug out of things, were every other one that was seen picked up and collected?
I don't think so, no.
And why don't you think so?
Because I remember a discussion between the Identification Bureau and my partner and I of whether we wanted him to pick up every pellet that was there. as far as going into and under the couch and in the blood, and it was decided no.
So you purposely decided to leave certain pellets there?
Correct.
Do you know how many you left?
No, I do not.
Did anybody bother counting?
No.
Now, is it your understanding, Detective Zoeller, that shotgun ammunition, if you go to buy, say, a box of ammunition from a particular manufacturer, and you're buying a specific size ammunition, shouldn't every shotgun shell in that box contain the same number of pellets?
No.
No?
No.
You mean, well, let me give you a clearer hypothetical. Let's say you went out to buy double-aught buckshot, okay?
Yes.
You understand that to be the largest
Yes.
buckshot made, and therefore the largest pellet-type shotgun ammunition.
Correct.
And let's say you went to buy Remington double-aught buck.
Your Honor, objecting to the questions was beyond his expertise, and also we have a witness on this subject tomorrow.
Well, I'll sustain it on the grounds it's beyond the witness's expertise.
Okay. Were you interested at all, as the investigating officer on this case, in trying to determine how many rounds were fired at that scene?
Yes.
Did you, you being the Beverly Hills Police Department and within your knowledge, receive shotgun pellets from the coroner's office?
Yes.
And did you ever compare the pellets you received from the coroner's office with the description of the coroner in his autopsy reports of how many pellets he found?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that again?
Yes. It's true, is it not, that in the coroner's report he makes reference in various places to how many pellets he obtained or found in the decedents?
I don't recall that.
Okay. Do you recall being present at the autopsy?
Yes.
You recall the coroner coming upon pellets in various parts of the anatomy of each of the decedents?
Yes.
You recall him removing them?
Yes.
Do you recall him giving them to you?
He didn't give them to me. It was given to his evidence person, who in turn gave it to me.
All right. And have you ever been made aware, or has it ever been brought to your attention, that the number of pellets the coroner found are not the same number of pellets the coroner turned over to you?
No.
You testified earlier that you spent the 9 hours or so at the location, not just in the actual scene of the shooting, the family room, but on the premises. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Did you personally inspect the other rooms, walk through them and look around?
Yes.
And in fact, you had your identification division or your photographic unit, I'm not sure which it would be, take pictures of every room of the house.
Yes.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
May I approach as well, please?
Showing you this photograph, Exhibit 13, that does appear to be one of the crime scene photographs that were taken by the Beverly Hills Police Department pursuant to this investigation, does it not?
Correct.
And do you know what room that is?
It was a room in the northwest portion of the house. I don't recall whether there's a room beyond that as a porch room, whether this is the one to the extreme west portion, but it was in the northwest portion of the house.
Okay, the west portion of the house faces the street, basically. This house faces west, correct?
Correct.
The north portion of the house is one side, the south portion the other side, and
The east being the rear.
the east is the rear, correct? So that the tennis court, the swimming pool are east of the house.
Correct.
All right. Now, this bedroom, you seem to recollect that that might be one of the bedrooms that overlooks the front street, Elm Drive.
Correct.
Okay. Do you notice the dark-colored, appear to be objects on the rug next to the bed?
Yes.
Did you see those objects when you went to the scene that first day?
Yes.
And are those objects what appear to be animal stool?
Yes.
Now, did you observe animal stool or fecal material in any other area of the house?
Not in the house, no.
Did you examine the breakfast room area of the house?
Yes.
Are you aware of Officer Prenesti's report of his observations?
I received it. I don't recall it at this particular moment.
Do you recall seeing any fecal material, animal fecal material in the breakfast room of the house?
I don't recall, no.
Did you cause any diagrams to be drawn of the actual scene, the family room?
Yes.
Were those diagrams drawn to scale?
I know measurements were taken at the time. I don't recall whether the diagrams were to scale. Show me the diagram, I could tell you.
Well, ignoring the little pen mark on this, let me show you this small one, which I won't mark, and just ask you if that was the size diagram that was drawn by members of your department the first day of the investigation.
Yes.
Okay, now this 20, this is a large economy size of that, is it not?
Correct.
Okay. And and this is a diagram of the actual family room.
That's correct.
Now, do you know if this is the diagram I'm talking about? Is it to scale?
It does not appear to be to scale.
Do you know whether the Beverly Hills Police Department ever prepared a scale diagram of that room?
I don't believe they did, no.
Did the Beverly Hills Police Department prepare the floor plan of the house that has been an exhibit here?
Yes.
And is that to scale?
Yes, it is.
But it does not contain any furniture locations, is that right?
That's correct.
Detective Zoeller, you said one of your jobs that night was to direct the gathering of evidence. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And was it someone else's job to interpret the crime scene?
As far as what?
Well, you were in court when the criminalist was here a couple of witnesses ago.
Yes.
And he said that part of his job is to gather evidence and to interpret it.
Yes.
Was there anybody whose job at the crime scene that night was to perform the role of a criminalist who would come in and look at the crime scene and try and reconstruct what had happened in that room?
No.
And is that because your department doesn't have a criminalist or for some other reason?
Because we don't have a criminalist.
How many homicides, roughly, does the Beverly Hills Police Department handle on a yearly basis?
Approximately 2 a year.
And so you don't have a criminalist who's on call from another department either, as the sheriff officer who testified here before suggested?
I learned subsequent to this investigation that we can call the sheriff's department criminalist to come out.
And is it true to say that, at least in your department, for whatever reason, part of the function of interpreting the crime scene falls on you as the investigating officer?
That's correct.
You did your best to make an examination of not only the immediate scene where you saw the decedents, but also the entire house?
Yes, plus we try to document it with photographs and videotape.
And it's one of the reasons you do that so that you can maybe have someone else take a look at the photographs or the videotape later on to maybe offer their expertise.
Correct.
In terms of your expertise in interpreting crime scenes, did it at some point in your investigation that morning become apparent to you that this was not a case of someone breaking into a stranger breaking into somebody's house and killing someone in the course of a robbery or a burglary?
Correct.
That was apparent to you?
I did not observe a break-in. It was my guess at the time that whomever killed Jose and Mary Menendez had been let in by them.
And you say it's a guess. It wasn't just a guess, was it? You actually took a look around to see if there were any signs of forced entry?
Correct.
You took a look to see if there was any signs of ransacking in the house?
Yes.
And based on the absence of forced entry and the absence of ransacking, you deduced, based on your experience, that this was not a crime scene that involves somebody breaking into the house and killing someone inside to get some money, for instance.
Correct.
And isn't it also true that based on your experience and looking at this crime scene that you very quickly came to the conclusion that one possible situation that you were dealing with here was a domestic killing? That is, someone in the family may have killed Mr. and Mrs. Menendez.
I don't think that evening that crossed my mind.
Well, when did it first cross your mind?
Just later in the investigation. I can't give you an exact date when.
Is it true to say that, at least as far as your investigation was concerned, that on that first night and in the course of your preliminary investigation, that the Menendez brothers were not eliminated as suspects?
That's correct.
In other words, they were possible suspects based on your observations of that crime scene, correct?
Correct. They had not been eliminated.
And it was based not only on your observation of the crime scene, but based on your perception that residential homicides are sometimes affiliated with family members. Isn't that true?
Yes.
That was one thing you were thinking about from the very beginning of the investigation, isn't that right?
Not necessarily family members, but somebody that the family knew.
As well as family members, correct?
Correct.
And so the perception was that they, as family members, may have committed this homicide
Section Vegas, at what point in time?
during the initial stages of your investigation.
Still unclear what you mean by the initial stages and who the they is.
Let me rephrase it, Ryan.
They
During
are.
the period of time after you arrived at the scene at approximately 1 o'clock in the morning, and I believe you said you were still there the next morning when the Menendez brothers arrived at approximately 5 a.m.
That's correct.
During that window, or that period of time from 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. on August 21st, 1989, you began to form these impressions that we're talking about. Isn't that true?
I don't think that early on, no.
Well, do you remember testifying at the grand jury proceeding in this case?
Yes.
And do you remember being asked back in December of 1992 this question at page 328 of the transcript? Question, when during the course of the investigation...
I'm sorry, Councilman, would you just wait a second?
Sure. Remember being asked this question by Ms. Bazanich? Question, when during the course of the investigation did the two Menendez brothers become suspects, that is, in your mind? And your answer, well, at the beginning of this investigation, I think everybody is a suspect connected to the family. Do you remember giving that testimony?
Yes.
And is that still accurate testimony at this point?
Yes.
So at the beginning of this investigation, in your mind, you thought everybody is a suspect connected to the family.
Yes.
And in other words, they weren't eliminated as suspects at that point, correct?
Exactly, that's correct.
Now, you said also that they came back, they being the Menendez brothers, came back to the house at about 5 a.m., is that correct?
About 5:30, correct.
Where had they been in the meantime, if you know?
I knew that they were at the police station being interviewed, and I don't know what time they had left there.
And how is it that they arrived back there? Did they drive up in a car? Did they walk up, if you remember?
I don't know. I was inside when they arrived.
And when you first saw them, you had a conversation with them, correct?
Correct.
And wasn't the conversation that they said they wanted to pick up some items in the house?
Yes.
And did they mention specific items that they wanted to pick up?
I asked what items, and they told me what specific items.
And was the only thing they mentioned tennis equipment, or did they mention a number of items?
They mentioned a number of items.
And do you remember what else they mentioned that they wanted to pick up?
The only thing that I remember in addition is clothing.
And was it your understanding, or did you convey to them that they weren't going to be able to stay overnight in the house?
Which night are you referring to? This is already 5:30 in the morning.
5 in the morning, so when they came at 5 in the morning, did you make clear to them that they weren't going to be able to stay overnight the following night?
No, I did not.
Was it your impression, based on talking to them, that they were gathering up things to go somewhere else, to stay somewhere else?
I don't recall having an impression what they were going to do that night.
And did you actually go with them inside the house to pick up these items?
At 5:30, no.
At 8:30, did you go inside the house with them when they came back?
Shortly after 8:30 or at 8:30, we, the investigators, relinquished the house to them. So they had the run of the house. They could do what they wanted.
My question is, did you see what they went in and took out of the house?
No.
Yourself?
No.
Were there cars located on the property when the brothers came back at 8:30?
Yes.
Were they allowed to go inside the cars or to take anything from the cars?
When I arrived, I instructed the patrol officers who were securing the perimeter not to allow anybody to go into the vehicles.
So they never were allowed to take anything out of the car, is that correct?
That's what my instructions were. I found out later that they had come back and gone through the Ford Escort, which was parked on the street, and that was only because there was a change of shift, and the officers on the day watch that came were unaware of my request to the morning watch.
Right. Now, at some point in the course of your investigation, you personally sat down and wrote a very detailed police report concerning your observations of the crime scene that night and several other items in the investigation. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And in that police report, did you put anything in your report about speaking with the Menendez brothers at 5 a.m. that morning?
No.
Did you put anything in that police report about speaking with the Menendez brothers at 8:30 that morning?
No.
And did you write any other police reports in which you documented those two conversations?
No.
Thank you. And I have here a series of photographs which I'll be marking sequentially. The first one I'd like to mark is Exhibit 21, please. Could you describe briefly what is depicted in the photograph?
Yes, the photographer is standing outside of the family room at 722 North Elm Drive, looking in an easterly direction at the east wall.
And in the photograph, there appears to be some doors. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, and were those the double doors leading into the family room?
Yes.
Do you see any tennis equipment in this photograph, excuse me, Exhibit 21?
Yes.
And could you count for me how many tennis rackets you can see?
In this photo, I see 2 tennis rackets.
And I'd like to ask you to describe what is depicted in these photographs.
In Exhibit 22 is a photograph of the wood floor in the family room, and it has a number 1 designator in the center of the photograph.
And is that one placed next to a piece of evidence of significance?
Yes.
Okay, could you describe what is next to it?
I can't tell exactly what it is in this one.
All right.
Do you have the evidence registered?
Okay.
Or one?
Item number 16, which contains the various envelopes, contains numbers on the envelopes referring to item numbers. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. And those item numbers correspond, do they not, to the item numbers which are contained on these photographs. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Now I'm going to ask you a specific question about photograph 29. I'll put it on our board in a minute, but you see in this photograph the bodies of the decedents have been removed. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And the coffee table appears to be at an angle in this photograph. Is that correct?
Yes.
Was that coffee table moved during the removal of the bodies?
No, it was not.
Now, as an example of what you were testifying to earlier, photograph number 32, which contains item 18, is that an example of a paper wad that you
Yes.
discussed? Okay. And photograph 33, which contains number 19 in it. Is that an example of a plastic overpotter wad?
It is.
So each of these markers indicates an item of evidence which was collected and returned to the Beverly Hills Police Department. Is that correct?
That's correct.
I have here, Your Honor, 3 more photographs, double sets, like to mark these as the next 3. That would be, I think, 36, 37, 38.
No, it's around 37.
Oh, thank you. Referring to photograph 37, I'd like to ask you what is depicted in this photograph.
This is the exterior shot of the French doors on the south wall of the family room. And it depicts the window panes that are blown out.
Is that a threshold or is that the top of the door, just so we know how the photograph is situated? In the photograph, there appears to be a portion of the door that is where the paint is scratched off, and then there appears to be either it's a threshold or it's a molding. Do you know?
It appears to be the bottom of the door.
So that would be the threshold that you walk.
Correct.
Is that correct? Okay. Photograph 38 and 39. Could you tell me what these 2 photographs depict, please?
38 is the interior photograph of the French doors, which depicts blood spatter on it, plus the window is blown out. And then 39 appears to be the same window pane, but a close-up shot of the same shot.
All right. So these 2 photographs are actually of the same side of the door, is that correct?
Correct.
All right. Your Honor, may I have the witness put all this back inside while I continue questions? Detective Zoeller, when you were inside of the home for approximately 9 hours on the 21st of August, did you see any animals inside of the house or on the property?
Yes.
Could you describe how many and what type?
I saw 2 dogs, a smaller, older dog, and then a larger puppy.
Do you have any idea of what breed these dogs were?
I don't recall. I remember the larger one being dark in color.
Now, the photographs which we've been discussing, did you provide copies of those photographs to the defense attorneys in this case?
Yes.
I believe you indicated when Mr. Burt was questioning you that you made some determinations about the crime scene as to whether or not there was a theft involved or a burglary involved. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Do you have any idea if the front door was locked or unlocked at the time of the crime?
At what
At the
period
time, at the time that Mr. and Mrs. Menendez were killed, do you know if the door was locked or unlocked?
No.
Okay. Now, when people talk about signs of forced entry, what do you think of when you look for signs of forced entry?
A kick door, broken locks.
Broken glass near a door?
Broken glass.
Okay. Did you see any signs of forced entry like that?
No.
But you have no personal knowledge of the state of the front door as to whether or not it was unlocked at the time?
That's correct.
Okay. I have nothing further of this witness at this time.